Yo, yo, it's JSF. How y'all doing? And now that we're really done with Mortal Kombat 11, I mean, I don't think there's any kind of argument really that we're getting more content for this game. We got another tiny patch, even smaller than the last one. It's pretty much it, right? And one of the things I forgot to mention in my last video about why the community went back to MKX is when I was talking about, hey, if the community doesn't really like the game that's current, they usually go back to the last game, right? The last game being Injustice 2, right? And I mentioned that, but what I forgot to mention is part of the reason that everybody didn't go back to Injustice 2 is because it doesn't seem like we're getting an Injustice 3. Just based on the timeline, based on what's happened, based on what hasn't happened, right? And then we've heard rumors and we've seen Ed Boon say, he's met with Marvel. So, we had an industry source confirm it. We don't know if it's true or not, but I think it's a safe bet to assume Netherrealm Studios is making a Marvel fighting game, right? But what will that Marvel fighting game be, right? There are a couple of different options. And that's why I wanted to make this video to talk about it. So if y'all enjoying the content, please subscribe. Anyways, I think there are three options to what this game can be. The first option being a Marvel fighting game, second option being a Mortal Kombat versus Marvel game, and the third option being Marvel versus DC game, right? Because, NetherRealm does make Injustice. That is a franchise that they've made, right? They made two games. Who's to say if we get a third? It's interesting, but I do want to go over all of them, and I do want to say that this will be mostly speculation, just looking at what the realistic situations of it could be. I don't have insider information or anything, obviously, but I do want to go over it and just kind of let people know, or at least say what I believe to be what it feels like is the likelihood of us getting one or the other, right? So I want to start off with the one everybody wants. I want to start off with the dream game, the one that would shatter the industry, the big one, right? Marvel versus DC, or DC versus Marvel. I think it would have to be. DC versus Marvel would be an amazing game. Even Ed Boon said that's like the dream game, right? That's the game everybody wants. That's the game that would be interesting, but it's also the hardest game to do. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Smash Ultimate, but even though that game did get made and it's amazing, it's a miracle that it got made, right? Even Sakurai and everybody who worked there said it was a licensing nightmare. It was ridiculous. I mean, a lot of the characters that they've added to the Smash series, they tried to get years beforehand, and it didn't work out. And then it eventually worked out, like characters like Snake and Sonic the Hedgehog, right? So stuff like that, it's possible, but it takes years and years in advance. It takes years and years of planning. And I know with DC and Marvel, it's only two companies. And I'm not naive enough to say, oh, they'll never work together, right? In the 90s or possibly the late 80s, DC and Marvel did a comic book crossover. It happened, right? It's not impossible. TC Games, who makes the Lego games, was owned by Warner Brothers, owns DC, blah, 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 blah. They've done Marvel Lego games. It's not impossible, right? But the reality is that it's a lot more difficult than a lot of people think it to be for a lot of different reasons. DC and Marvel, I believe they're capable of working together, but they all have their egos, right? They have their characters that they all want to be represented. They have their characters that they all want to be represented a certain way. Hell, even in Injustice 1, right? Superman was a villain, and at that time, it wasn't that common. It was like new for Superman to be portrayed as the bad guy, right? I mean, not brand new, but it was not nearly as common as it is today. But even in that game, he was only allowed to be the villain if he was also the hero. And if you remember playing the final chapter of that game, Superman is the one who beats Superman. Hilarious, right? Also, just with characters, right? If you just think about it, if you think about a Marvel game and a DC game, every Marvel game has characters that needs to be in it, right? Iron Man needs to be in it. Hulk needs to be in it. Captain America needs to be in it. Black Widow needs to be in it. Spider-Man needs to be in it. There are a lot of characters, right? That's already 5 characters. Then you get to other characters that probably, like Falcon probably needs to be in it, right? Hell, they might say Winter Soldier needs to be in it. Vision might need to be in it. You might say Hawkeye needs to be in it. I'm already at like 9 characters, right? Then you think about DC, there's characters that need to be in it. You got Superman needs to be in it. Batman, Flash, Green Lantern, Wonder Woman, Shazam, Aquaman need to be in it. That's what, 7 characters, and like 9 on Marvel side, 7 on DC side. I haven't even named a single villain yet, right? You need to have opposition, so it can't just be all heroes, even if you get a storyline to work it out, right? But it's just gonna be a lot of characters, right? And that's not a bad thing. We love characters, but I don't foresee it being a 1v1 game. I just don't think that would be that practical to have the roster you need to have, because there's going to be so many characters that feel left out, right? With a Netherrealm game, that's their specialty, making the 1v1 games. They're not really, they can make 2v2. There's tag mode in MK9. MK11 has tag functionality in the game, but you can't play it as a mode, right? But 2v2, 3v3 is not something they've really done and sold a game on before. So that would be a new ground on top of a new ground on top of a new ground. I don't think Marvel's really trying to juggle it like that much. That would be a big issue. Plus, that would also give more room to compare it to the Marvel versus series, right? You know, DC versus Marvel, Marvel versus Capcom, Marvel versus Capcom 2 and 3, 3v3 games. Marvel Infinite is 2v2. The classic Marvel versus Capcom is 2v2 as well. It just gives them more room to be compared to that, right? I don't think Netherrealm is gearing up to make this big 3v3 40 character roster at launch, or 30 characters with 20 plus DLC. Like, I don't think they're gearing up to make that kind of game. I don't think they're the developer you go to for that. Not to mention the story mode. You would need a hell of a, I mean, Netherrealm is a studio you want to go to if you want a good story for your fighting games, but you would need a hell of a story mode for this, right? And it's hard enough for them to do a story mode where all the characters get to shine in Injustice or in Mortal Kombat. If you do DC versus Marvel, it's going to be even more difficult to give all the Avengers a shine, give all the Justice League a shine, give the new characters a shine, give Kamala Khan some shine, give Cyborg some shine. You know what I mean? It's just like, it's a lot. It's a very, very, very tall order. I think we all would love the game and it's amazing, but the game itself is really difficult. It is hard enough making an Avengers game as it is. Y'all saw the one that just came out recently and how that went. Didn't go too great. It's hard enough to do that as it is, hard enough to do a Justice League game as it is. So I think we would all love this one, but I don't think it's really realistic to expect that to be the first Marvel game Netherrealm ever works on to be Marvel versus DC. I think Netherrealm will work on another game, and then maybe the next game after that could be Marvel versus DC. But speaking of versus, the second option is Marvel versus Mortal Kombat, or Mortal Kombat versus Marvel, or MK versus MCU if you're feeling freaky. I think this is interesting, but I think this also has some of the same issues as the last game, right? Being a versus game, being a game that is going to be compared to other games, because if it's Mortal Kombat versus Marvel, it's going to be compared to Mortal Kombat versus DC, which is not really fondly remembered, not really a great game in most people's eyes. And if Mortal Kombat is top billing, if it's Mortal Kombat versus Marvel, it's going to run into some of those problems like, oh, it's a Mortal Kombat game, or is it a Marvel game? Because if it's a Mortal Kombat game, there are expectations. Obviously, you're not cutting Iron Man's head off. You know what I mean? Like, the Hulk is not doing a fatality to Liu Kang. I don't think that's what they want to do. They've even said plenty of times they don't want to rip Superman's head off. The Joker is different. He's a villain. He kills people for fun. He can be thrown in a game like this, but the good guys, not so much, right? And plus, like, if you just look at what happened with MK versus DC, they've learned a lot since then. But I think you have to tackle some of the same hurdles, right? You could throw a Mortal Kombat character or two in a Marvel game, but doing a full crossover game is gonna be really difficult as well. Not impossible, but difficult. And then if you flip the title around and it's Marvel versus Mortal Kombat, then it goes, oh, it's a Marvel versus game. And then that comes with all the issues like, oh, is this like Marvel versus Capcom? Is this MVCI? And then you got to deal with that. Like, whether that's the game you want to make or not, like, it doesn't matter. Like, fans are fans. You're going to have to explain to the casuals and to everybody else in the world, hey, I know this says Marvel versus, but it has nothing to do with Marvel versus the series, right? Marvel Versus is a big series. It's huge. It's, you know what I mean? It's one of the biggest fighting game series of all time. The Marvel vs. Capcom series, or just the Versus series, right? When you say that or you put that in your game, it comes with a lot of expectations, a lot of ideas. And I don't think NetherRealm is doing this to try to step on Capcom. I don't think they're trying to step on the Marvel vs. series. I don't think they're trying to be anything like it, but you got to be careful with what you do in these type of situations, because if you do it wrong, you're going to be directly compared to that, and you're going to be like reviewed based on that. Your game's going to be perceived based on that, and all of those things affect your sales. And at the end of the day, this is all about money. So It's really important how you pick your title, how you pick your game, how you pick your characters, how you pick your gameplay. All that kind of stuff is stuff that really needs to be thought about. And I think us as fans, we don't always just sit here and think about it like, what difference does it make if it's Marvel versus Mortal Kombat or Mortal Kombat versus Marvel? It could have big implications in the future. And that doesn't mean they can't do a game with Marvel and Mortal Kombat characters, right? But I just don't think doing a full crossover game first is what they're thinking they should do. I definitely don't think they should do it. It's possible, but I don't think it's the greatest idea. Yo, so this video I actually recorded a couple of days ago, and I'm only adding this part in because yesterday Ed Boon posted this tweet, and it's a clip that somebody did on YouTube and says, inspiration for our upcoming Marvel vs. Mortal Kombat game with a winky face. Now, this is obviously an absolute deconfirmation of the Marvel vs. Mortal Kombat game, so we're not getting MK versus Marvel. If we were, this would literally be an announcement, and it's clearly not. It's a joke, it's a troll. So again, everything I said, but I said all that before Ed Boon posted this, so I did want to update and add this just to let y'all know I did see this, and yes, this is pretty much an absolute deconfirmation, so just more evidence that we're not getting that game. Plus, I do feel like to some degree Marvel is protective of their IP. If they weren't, they would have just gave Capcom the IP again and said, go for it again. Marvel vs. Capcom 4, right? I mean, hell, when they did Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, Capcom didn't really get a budget for it. They kind of had to fight to make that the game they wanted to make it. And the game looks the way it does because it didn't really have a budget, right? Because they didn't want to really put in on it because they didn't know if it was going to work or yield the results that they needed it to, right? So they are protective of their IP to some degree. And I think that being the case, they're going to want more of the focus to be on them. Like, hey, if you guys are going to do our characters right. I want all your focus to be on doing our characters right, not just throwing our characters in the game like they're jobbers, or like some of them are cool, some of them are not. We want your focus to be completely on it. And that's why I think the most likely scenario is that we get the final option, which is a Marvel game. You can call it Marvel Combat, but you probably shouldn't. I think this is the most likely scenario for all these reasons I'm saying, right? You get to do all the things you do. You get to please Marvel. You get to please the fans, because you got to remember, the fans haven't had a straight up Marvel fighting game in win ever. We got Contest of Champions on phones. That's about as close as we have to a 1v1 Marvel fighting game. You know what I mean? Like, that's really the closest we have. We've had Marvel vs. Capcom and all those games, but those are different, right? With Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, you could tell that they tried to kind of take cues from what Netherrealm is doing. The game has a whole comprehensive story mode with you playing as different rotating characters. It looks more realistic. It seems like that's the direction they were going in. It seems like tapping Netherrealm is the next step, right? But you want Netherrealm because they've done it with DC. They've done it with their own characters. Now you want them to do it with your characters, with your stories. You know what I mean? And they can tell a lot of interesting stories. They can do a lot of cool things. Something of a rumor I saw get tossed around, and it could be an Avengers versus X-Men game. And I was like, that could be great. Right? AVX game, you know, because we're gonna have to get some X-Men in this game. They'll probably be revealed late, but we're gonna have to get some X-Men, couple Fantastic Four characters and stuff like that. And somewhere where Marvel vs. Capcom kind of missed the ball, well, Infinite at least. Granted, Ultron Sigma, that was a cool idea for a villain and stuff like that. I think they went a little too in on that. Like, it was a good idea. I don't want to knock the idea, but I think there are other ways you can go about it, right? You can go about using the scrolls in your game as, like, you know what I mean, undercover agents as to why you fight different characters, right? Because they're shapeshifters. In the comics, they posed as Marvel characters for decades. So it's like, you can say, hey, why would Captain America fight Iron Man? Well, that Iron Man's not actually Iron Man, he's a Skrull. Like, they're just, and that's like a very layer one idea just out of my brain. But there are a lot of different ways you can go about this if it's just a Marvel game, or if it's just an Avengers versus X-Men game. That storyline writes itself. You know why they fight each other, right? You know what I mean? And it happens, right? Even in the Marvel movies, you see Hulk fight Iron Man, and you see the Hulkbuster armor come out. So, you know, this could actually work out and work the best. I honestly think it's the best option. I think we would get the best fighting game through this. I would love to see Marvel versus DC, but by Netherrealm, I don't know if they would do that justice for so many reasons, right? Character-wise, you know, gameplay style-wise, storyline-wise, actual character. Because, like, some characters going to get the short end of the stick, right? It just kind of has to happen. It kind of sucks, but you know, based on how NetherRealm does it, it would have to happen. The same with Marvel versus Mortal Kombat. I just don't think those universes really cross over well or need to cross over. There are certain characters in Marvel, like Blade in a Mortal Kombat game. That would be amazing. Put Blade in MK12. I'm saying it now, right? But the best option for NetherRealm Studios, I would say, and the most realistic option that I think we're actually gonna get and probably get an announcement for in June is an all Marvel fighting game. Probably a Marvel game with Marvel characters, obviously X-Men characters, a couple Fantastic Four with Scorpion thrown in as DLC or something. But let me know what y'all think, man. Do y'all agree? Do y'all disagree? What do y'all think the Marvel game is gonna be? Do y'all still think NetherRealm is doing Injustice 3? I don't know, man. Leave a comment. Let your boy know. Subscribe if y'all enjoying the content. And other than that, man, y'all stay safe. Have a good day. JSF. I'm outie. Peace.